Hariom and greetings from Niagara Falls. In a map that our community is studying, a question that is posed to a seeker: what causes one not to shine? And the answer the seeker gives is darkness. And that's obvious. But as one reflects on this more, what causes us not to shine is theory. When we only engage in theory and not application, that inhibits us from tapping our potential, releasing our power. It is for this reason that we have established our Prthvi Sevasanga. Satsanga is needed, but often we can get lost in theory, and that's why we have a Sevasanga, which is application oriented. And truly, all of you, our community, has tuned into the need for application. Moments ago, I received a message from our crew, our team, sharing we have completed collecting and donating 11,000 pounds of food for our local food banks. It's done, and now it will keep growing because other than all of you, you know about this, but I'm not going to tell anyone else. That way people keep collecting and keep donating. 11,000. That is a massive amount of food that we are offering to those who need this. In 2024, the feeling behind our Prithvi Sevasanga is to apply ourselves even more. One way we want to try to do this is through advocacy. Our community is engaged in serving our Universal Mother. How can we ramp this up? How can we scale this? And that's why our team is revisiting, rebranding Prithvi Sevasanga. Even as I'm saying it, some of you may not know what these words mean. So can we take on a brand that is more universal? This year, we started in January with changing for nature. And one of the main thoughts that was shared was refuse. We always think about reduce, reuse, recycle, but the first R is refuse. Refuse certain materials, refuse certain lifestyles. In February, we took up transforming transportation. And a seeker in our community was sharing how damaging it is for one's car to idle. And a simple practice of not idling, just like turning lights off, unplugging appliances you're not using. If everyone did this, there would be a massive impact. And now we're in March. This is our 27th consecutive workshop. This is on being water wise. When water and wisdom come together, I'm always reminded of a lovely quote. And this will be my final thought before our experts continue. When it rains too much, fish eat ants. When it rains too little, ants eat fish. How delicate the balance of water is, who eats who. So with that, our team will continue.
I was thinking before this, I think too much maybe sometimes. And I was thinking, oh, we have lots of doctors in our community. I guess lots of them related to human body. And I guess I would say we have one doctor typically on helping people learn how to live Vedanta, right? We know who that is. And then today, we have another doctor, a different type of career professional doctor. He's a doctor of ecosystems. And that was a very cool thought to have. Like he can analyze and assess ecosystems and how they're doing and what they're being like, being able to diagnose ecosystems. And few things that he shared, Jared Bono, right? Okay, last name. He's a senior researcher and director of Cornell's University's Hudson Valley Research Lab, and he supports team of researchers for commercial fruit industry in New York State. And he has worked in at least 8 countries so far. And his PhD research is eco-hydrology of dry lands. I hope I'm getting it right, Jared. And he was a volunteer in Peace Corps in Ghana, in West Africa, and he has spent at least a decade in India, probably more than many of us, and very teeny tiny small villages. He'll tell us a lot more about it. And right now he lives in Catskills in New York with Soumya. Many of us know Soumya, loves hiking and skiing. And oh, this was a new thing. He spends a lot of time looking for best dosa shops in Chennai. So that's Jared for us. So thank you for joining today. Teach us some more.
Thank you, Zui. I feel like I know all of you guys. I know you're meeting me for the first time, but I'm usually in the background when my wife or kids are on these meetings. So thank you for having me. It's super exciting. I will add that it's not just the dosa shops, but the juice shops in Chennai. I'm enticed by, and I'm still looking. I found some really good ones. Happy to share those. But in the meantime, today I'm going to share with you some of my work on water. Let me see. Can you see my slides? Did they come up? All right. Well, as we said, my name is Jared. I am a research associate at Cornell, and I run a laboratory, and my slides are not advancing. Let me see. There we go. Did somebody click that, or was it me? Maybe I did that. Oh, it's working. Perfect. So I'm a hydrologist by training, as we mentioned. I currently run an experimental orchard and vineyard with a bunch of scientists. And when we say we support the commercial fruit and vegetable industry, we do the entomology and the plant pathology studies on our experiment station so that the growers don't have to deal with a lot of the problems they see out there. So my focus is on precision agriculture and hydrology, the interaction of water and plants and soil. But I really liked what Vivekji said about application versus theory, because what we do on the experiment station is very much applied science. We're not theoretical. We are out there trying these things and experimenting and seeing how we can be better stewards of not only the food systems, but our ecosystems and our communities, and how to save water in the food systems, et cetera. So I just wanted to show you some of these cool pictures as we get going talking about water. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've been able to work with communities around the world, rural communities, urban communities. I have lived in small villages in remote locations, but I've also lived in Mumbai and Bangalore and Chennai, as well as New York. So some of the bigger cities too. And I'm excited today to share about my water work in those locations and sort of how it all fits together with what we're seeing in the world with climate change and some of the challenges we all face. And then I'll bring it back to what we can all do in our lives, because I know we all know that water is a challenge. Maybe we've experienced it ourselves. These 2 young girls I met in Burkina Faso, West Africa. And really, this is what motivated me to do what I do. I grew up in the Hudson Valley. I was very privileged, and I didn't really see much of the world. And then my sister was a volunteer, a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa. And so when I was an undergraduate student studying geology, I went and stayed with her, and I saw real poverty for the first time. And I saw what I thought, was the injustice of poverty, and how it meant that these two little girls have to spend most of their day gathering water from that hole in the riverbed that you see, that big, dangerous hole, and can't go to school, and therefore don't have opportunity, and therefore will not get out of the cycle of poverty. To me, that is an injustice. So I wanted to dedicate my life to research, better understanding the environment, and how I could help communities overcome challenges like this. And we do face some challenges. The world is seeing a demand for water that's outpacing our population growth. So we're getting more people and a higher demand for water. 2/3 of the world, and probably many of us, will experience either water stress or water scarcity over the next few years. Many of us are already facing that now. And I have to say, unfortunately, climate change makes all of this worse. So I have a lot of horror stories about the way the climate is moving, what that means for the water cycle. Sometimes not fun to talk to at parties because of this, but I will stick to the fun stuff. We will face some of this, but I will try to keep it positive and on the things that we can do. So I'm going to share stories from 2 different parts of the world that sort of paint the whole picture of what's happening globally with water. And then, like I said, what we can do about it. So I was just out in the Pacific Northwest. This is the Yakima Valley in Washington. I was visiting the International Tree Fruit Association had a meeting. It was really interesting. As you drive from Seattle, as I know a lot of you are on the Pacific Northwest, as you drive over the Cascades, it's very rainy, and it's like a rainforest, and the trees are 40 feet tall, and there's moss and things. It's green everywhere. On the other side, what we call the rain shadow, those mountains capture all of the moisture. On the other side is a desert with tumbleweeds. And this is where most of your fruit is coming from in North America. We are irrigating the desert. What you see in this picture are grapes, cherries, and apples. And we're taking the snow melt from the Cascades and irrigating these things. It takes 3 feet of water to grow an acre of apples out there. 3 acre feet. It's an acre covered up to 3 feet deep to grow 1 acre of apples. And to a hydrologist, this is somewhat terrifying because, well, the water cycle is changing. These mountains, the Cascades, the snowpack is reducing every year. They're getting less snow, less timely. What happens is the snow, just like in many mountain ranges in the Himalayas and the Rockies and everywhere, snow builds up. It slowly melts as the spring comes and the summer comes, providing sort of a steady source for water on all of our rivers. Well, the snowpack is declining. What's going to happen to our food systems and the fruit industry in 30 years when we don't have that anymore? So a lot of what was going on at this conference was looking at more efficient ways to grow that fruit, more efficient ways to use that water so that our food systems can continue. This is a map that shows areas of the world where the amount of water we're using exceeds how it's getting naturally or artificially replenished, right? Where use exceeds natural rates of recharge. That could be in the ground or rivers or elsewhere. It's a little misleading because it makes it look like a dire situation for India and the Middle East, and we're okay in North America. But it's really a local situation. In the Southwest US, in Texas, the US, we're withdrawing groundwater from aquifers. That water is 10,000 years old. It was deposited during the retreat of the last ice age. In other words, it's not getting recharged. We're mining groundwater. And this is happening all over the world. We've pulled so much water out of the ground around the world to grow wheat and other things that we've changed planetary gravitation. Like it's changed how the Earth spins. That's how much mass we've moved of water out of the ground. I don't think people quite realize how big of a challenge this is and what we're up against, because when that water is gone, we're not replenishing it fast enough. So I'm going to tell you a tale of 2 cities or 2 towns, 2 water systems. One of the largest metros in the US, New York City, not very far from where I sit now, is that one on the left. And on the right, Pachputiwadi, which was a small village I started working in Maharashtra, gosh, probably 15 years ago or more at this point. But their two water systems are very similar, and we'll see why. So let's start with New York City. I imagine most people don't know where New York gets its water. Look at those skyscrapers. Look at that big river there. That's the Hudson River. You think, gosh, they have abundant water. They can just pull all that water right out the river. In actuality, most of their water comes from places like this, far from the city, 100 miles away in this case. Zui, I think we went with you on this rail trail here. This is the Ashokan Reservoir in the Catskill Mountains, very close to where I'm sitting now. That reservoir there provides water for about 8 million residents of New York City. And the way this works is the people in New York, the people who get the water, pay a certain amount, and that money gets used to manage this entire system, all these pipes. But it also goes towards what we're going to call watershed or stream management programs upstate in these mountains. They pay for programs to keep these streams, these forests healthy, and these streams clean. And I'll show you what that means. So this is a map of the New York City watershed system. Down in the bottom there, that's New York City, and the blue line going up there, that's the Hudson River. And this is about 100 miles to some of these reservoirs in this green area up here. That's they're called watersheds. I imagine I should let me define a watershed. A watershed is like a physical boundary where wherever rain or precipitation falls on, say, a ridge of a mountain, maybe the Continental Divide, if you're familiar with that, half the water runs down the mountain one side and goes into that river. Half the water runs down the mountain on the other side and goes into that river. That's a watershed boundary. And it's sort of a unit we use for ecological management, that all the water that falls in this area drains to this point. Okay, that's the definition of a watershed. And you should pay attention because we're going to play Jeopardy at the end. No prizes, but you get bragging rights. So the watersheds north of New York City are very well managed and very well maintained in order that New York City can take the water from the streams, bring it to the city. They don't have to filter it. They do treat it. It gets treated with UV or chlorine or other things, but it avoids filtration. And there's very few cities in the world that get to do this. There's New York City, Boston, I think Seattle and Portland. They do the same thing in the Cascades. They maintain those mountain ranges beautifully and keep the streams clean so they can avoid a filtration plant. Why? It saves tens of billions of dollars a year. So what does this look like? So let's zoom in on this watershed. This is a series of reservoirs. You can see the little blue there, and all those little dots are different type of projects that are occurring either in the forests or in the stream channels themselves. This is a very detailed project. Tens of millions of dollars go into this every year. What I was doing on this project, I led the group that was the outreach and education. So all of the extension work, all of the educational programs, we did stream snorkeling. So if you wanted to get your kid interested in hydrology and natural habitats and environments, you could actually come and sign your kid up and do snorkeling in the stream. We put it like, they get their goggles on and they're like paddling around in the shallows, but they're looking at stream health and habitat, and all the kids in these watersheds all get watershed education because they're the future landowners in this watershed. So, but these are all very cool projects that it's kind of a global model for what we call payment for ecosystem services, because the people in the city are paying for good ecosystems and ecosystem health upstate. And what some of those projects look like is this here. You're looking at a before and after. So the left side of the picture is a stream that's in bad health. That road on the left side of the picture there is really pushing the stream up against that bank, and that the stream is cutting into that bank. So, you know, rivers like to meander, they're natural systems and they move naturally. What we do, we come and build a road in that valley, and now that stream can't meander. Now it's biting into that bank. As it does, all that soil sloughs into the water, gets entrained, it's sediment laden, brings more pollutants. That water is then not suitable for drinking in New York City. So what the picture on the right is a natural designed stream channel. All those rocks were placed. The engineers and the hydrologists on this used essentially the natural systems of a stream. That stream gets to meander. Those rocks are slowing down the water. As the water comes up during natural floods and goes back down, there's space for the stream to meander. And as you can see, the bank is intact, the forest is intact. That water runs cleaner. So that's just one example. And this is pretty intensive. The map on the right you're seeing is a stream that runs from south to north. And those little green and red and yellow lines there are all different reaches of the stream that are being managed very intensively for different systems. And those are all projects listed. And those are my two kids playing in that stream at that location. Zoo, I think we went there to that campground that's in the outside of Phoenicia in the Catskills. But that water is all part of New York City's water supply. And you can go, and it's recreation, and it's a beautiful forest, and that water is crystal clear, but it's very intensively managed. And like I said, this avoids the cost of a filtration plant for New York City to build that they would have to do if they were pulling just out of the Hudson River somewhere. That plant would probably cost $10 billion in a decade to build and cost $1 billion a year to operate. All right. So instead, the ratepayers in the city pay a couple, tens of millions of dollars to keep these programs going. And really, it's the forest and the watershed that you're seeing here in front of us that do all the filtration. It's the natural system that they're paying to maintain. But let's switch continents. We'll come back to New York and how this fits together. Different type of water system. So now we're in rural Maharashtra, in the Western Ghats, near to Mahabaleshwar. Maybe if you know that. If you've ever seen Swadesh. Swadesh, this is where Swadesh was filmed, very close by. We lived here for many years, worked with several communities around here. That there is the main tank in the middle of the village. That's where everybody gets their drinking water, bathing water, even the cows. That's the drinking water there for the livestock. All of their water comes from the top of the mountains in the back of the picture. Small springs. Everybody know what a spring is? A spring is where groundwater comes onto the surface. Okay, either through pressure or something else, and I'm going to show you guys hydrogeology. But that water is captured up in the top of those mountains, and it's gravity fed down pipes 2 kilometers down to the village here, right? Very clean water, beautiful systems, been there for a long time. This is the way traditionally hundreds, thousands of villages in India have gotten their water. However, under climate change, a lot of those springs are declining. In fact, most of them are. The water flow is reducing. Why? Because our temperatures are going up. Our precipitation events are getting more intense, meaning we might get more rain. However, it's coming in fewer storms. So very intense, and most of it runs off and less of it infiltrates to the ground to feed the aquifers that are giving these springs water and the community's water. So we were working with them on a couple of different projects to help manage that. So anybody want to learn the hydrology of this? Do you notice in the mountains there's some horizontal lines? In the Deccan Plateau of India, also if you're in the northwest of North America, the Columbia River flood basalts, that's very similar. Old lava flows that came and made these layers. Well, the different layers have different properties as a function of how quickly they cooled. So you've got layers that cooled really quickly, and they're all full of cracks, and water can flow through those layers. Compact basalt took longer, cooled over a longer period of time, and water doesn't flow through. So what happens is water gets in during storms, infiltrates, it becomes groundwater, flows down, hits that compact basalt, and starts to flow laterally because it can't go down, and water's pushing on top. And then it'll come out on the side of the mountain as a spring. Make sense? Couple bobbing heads. Yeah. This is what it looks like. See that little puddle of water there? If you ever go up to Mahabaleshwar or Panchgani, go and see some of these springs. Now, some of them are unmaintained like this one, but you can see they go along that whole line of the mountain at that range because that's where that compact basalt is stopping the water's coming out. However, a lot of communities use these. They'll put a tank there and they'll capture that water and they'll keep it clean, and it's good drinking water. So this is my drawing of this system, okay? So if we're thinking traditional watershed, along the top of the ridge, any rain that falls will drain down to one village on this side, the other village on that side, okay? That's the watershed along the top of the ridge. But a spring shed or groundwater is a little more complicated because that water could be coming from the other side of the mountain. There's 3 villages in this picture. And the rain's falling on that village on the right side. The water's going into the ground and it's flowing along and it's coming out to the springs to that village on the far left. So if this community wants to maintain their water, they might have to work with another village or another community. And that got kind of challenging. That was kind of tough because, the Gram Panchayat worked at the village level and could do whatever. But when you start working between gram panchayats, well, then it gets a little more challenging. And that third village on the top now runs a bore well down, is intercepting that water that's coming through village from those different villages. Yeah? Good. Looks like I haven't put you to sleep yet. Really what this means is those mountains need to be conserved. Those forests needs to be intact. Space needs to be provided for the ecosystems to function so that rain falls on a forest, there's soil, the rain doesn't run off quickly, it has time to infiltrate, gets down into those aquifers, continues to feed those springs, and continues to provide water for the villages you see in this picture. This is the headwaters of the Krishna River. This is on the Ghats on the way up to Panchgani. My daughter was born just out of that picture to the right in Y. Lived there for many years. So we would work with communities, and this is a map that one of the communities drew of their village. This might not be Maharashtra, this might be in Uttarakhand, but we did similar work in many parts of India. And we would work with the community to identify where their water was coming from, even if it was in another village on the other side of the mountain, and figure out how they were going to try to protect that area where the recharge was happening. And this was done with citizen science. Folks, we taught these concepts to thousands of people so that everybody knew how to figure out where their water was coming from. And it turned out to be pretty revolutionary, I would say. I think last time I was back, I saw that the central government now has spring protection as part of the central government policy, spring protection and management. Yeah, we would work with communities, spend a lot of time on doing Shramadhan, identifying and protecting these springs, but also doing things like social fencing, where we would keep people from any open defecation or grazing of animals in areas where this was getting recharged, and it would actually keep the water healthier, keep E. coli out, things like that. Because this, you've seen this before, I imagine. I think this was somewhere in the Northeast. This might have been Meghalaya. This is the traditional institutional response to declining water, is to put more tanks, more bore wells, more pipes, when really what's needed is more forests and intact watersheds. Does that make sense? You can't do this without pipes. However, you can't just continue to add more pipes and draw from a limited resource that's going away. We saw in the map in the beginning that withdrawals are far exceeding any of the recharges that's happening. And you're like, Jared, what are you talking about? Like a village of, a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000 people. What's that have to do with anything? Well, this is a map. That's the Western Ghats, the Sahyadris in the red there. And if you look at it, those are the headwaters for all of the rivers in southern India. Kaveri, the Krishna, all of them come out of there. Some of the Eastern Ghats and other places, but most of the major rivers drain from here. So what happens at those headwaters, at the tops of those rivers, is important for, over 400 million people. And what we see is that these little springs and these small forests being protected account for almost half of the water supply in rural India. It's hundreds of millions of people that depend on stuff like this. So, talked a little bit about a small village water supply in India. Talked about a major city water supply in the US. What do these two have in common? Anyone want to type in the chat? I haven't been following the chat. You want to take a guess? What's the main thing between these two water stories? Any guesses? Sammy, you know the answer. Watershed, greenery, good. Yes, exactly. Let me... The answer is the forests, right? These natural forests, if you follow a water source, a water supply to its source, there's usually a forest at the top of it. These forests, these mountains, these natural landscapes, the ecosystems are fundamental to our water supply. I think I mentioned payment for ecosystem services. Ecosystems provide us with all of these really things we can't put a value on: clean water, clean air, healthy soils, mental and spiritual health. And in these communities, you can see that it's worth maintaining them. And in New York City's case, people are paying to maintain an ecosystem hundreds of miles away. In the villages in India, they're talking at gram panchayats on the other side of the mountain where their water is getting recharged. And we need that link between people and that link between healthy ecosystems. And if you take one thing away from this, this global idea of water supply or ecosystems in general, Mother Nature needs half, right? That's a good way to think about it. Mother Nature needs half to be intact, at least for half the space, to provide these services, and in places that are drier in the West, that might be more. They might need more of those landscapes maintained for clean water and clean air and things like that. But we never really think of it like that, and we just keep taking more from Mother Nature. I should add that, in both of these ecosystems, there's a lot of human pressure, from cutting trees to fires to grazing, but there's some successes we can point to here. The Catskill Mountains that you're looking at on that left side, that picture I think we took just last summer, those mountains were entirely clear cut at one point in time. All those trees were cut down for timber industry and for the tanning industry. The hemlocks were used to tan leather. For some reason, it was one of the few places that had it. And so those mountains were cut down and cleared to nothing. And now they're back to healthy ecosystems in about 100 years. So this is possible to stop the environmental degradation. It's possible to turn this around so that we can have clean water and clean air and healthy places to go. So I wanted to provide a little bit of hope. I don't know if you know the Millennium Development Goals. This was something that happened before the year 2000, when the UN and the planet set goals for different development indicators. And the indicator for water, the Millennium Development Goal for water, was met. That meant providing sources of clean drinking water and piped water to a certain number of people. And really excited that was one of the goals that was met. So these things are possible. I think if you've spent time in places like Chennai, that there's been a lot of encroachment on the temple tanks or the livestock tanks that were out there, or the wetlands and the mangroves. A lot of that's been built over. And, the floods that occurred in Chennai this year, or a lot of different cities in Mumbai every year, a lot of that's because those systems, those natural systems, were providing flood control. And when you take them away, that's the consequence. So a lot of cities now are realizing this. Kolkata has a really good system that they do to actually also treat wastewater and to do some flood control. Delhi's now working on a revitalization of the wetlands in the city. And globally, our water use is improving. So I wanted to end on a good note, but also a call to action and some of the things you can do. I think a lot of people feel environmental dread. There's a lot of concern. Climate change, when you look at it, it's pretty horrendous about what we're going to be facing, what our kids are going to be facing in the next few generations. So some of the things you can do now. My take is learn, get involved, take action, and advocate. Learn. What does that mean? So does everybody know where their water comes from? I would encourage you to take a look. If you don't know, maybe you do, and I applaud those that do. What watershed are you in? If you're in a place like the Chesapeake Bay and around Washington, D.C. and Maryland, and they've done a really good job of trying to protect the bay and educating people on saying what this storm drain here drains into the bay, or you might see some of that. This storm drain drains into the Hudson River estuary, or Know what watershed you're in. And also who manages your water in your municipality or your community. Even if you've got a well in your backyard and that's where you're getting your water, somebody is managing water at a scale, either the watershed or the at the groundwater level or the aquifer. And I would say get involved and go visit those municipal authorities. I'm sure they have events for you to go and get involved, like river cleanups or watershed events. Please go and spend some time with them. They usually struggle to get anybody interested. But if you're concerned at all about water, it's a very fun thing to do. I would say that if you're going to visit a wastewater treatment plant, that you change your clothes because you'll come home kind of smelling distinct. So I learned that after visiting a couple of wastewater treatment plants. Salmia likes to get me to go visit landfills wherever we go. So but we just have a different tourism style than you guys do. But I would encourage you to try it out. And then in terms of taking action, what did Vivekji say at the beginning? Refuse. Conservation is the cheapest source of water, meaning not using the water is the best new source of water. Use less. Refuse it. Fix leaks. Oh my goodness, leaks. Leaks are terrible. If you have a lawn or landscaping, try to use xeriscape. If you haven't heard of that, that's low water or zero water requiring landscaping. You can reduce your water footprint of your food if you haven't thought about that yet. I don't want to pick on certain crops, but it's pretty easy to find out which ones use an inordinate amount of water. And you can have a big impact by not choosing those types of foods. Plant-based, local foods, in-season stuff, especially. And then finally, I'd say advocate. Support land and water conservation in your community. Remember, Mother Nature needs half. And there are organizations out there working on open space and conservation for a variety of reasons. But if you support them, particularly ones that are related to your water supply or the ecosystems that support your community, great thing to advocate for. And also, I would advocate for climate change policy. Contact your local representatives, state, local, federal level, whatever it happens to be, and tell them you support climate change policy, because really it's kind of frightening. And, if you want the scary talk about what we're in for with climate change from a hydrologist's perspective, happy to do that anytime, but probably not 9 o'clock. But it's kind of terrifying. And I think we all need to really make some serious change. We can't keep putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The Earth just passed 1.5 degrees of warming on average. That's the global average. And we're already seeing the challenges in the food system. I work with farmers all the time. Talk to farmers anywhere in the world. Everybody always complains about the rain, and they always have, but the scope and the rate of change and the scope of change that we're seeing in these systems really is beyond our ability to adapt. And let me give you one example. It's February. Last week it was February in New York. I went up into the orchard, and our trees are waking up. Our apple trees, our hazelnuts, they're starting to put out leaves. And it can't be, because we're going to have hard freezes again. Last year in May, we got a very late freeze, and it destroyed pretty much the entire peach crop in New York State. Those types of things are happening at a faster clip than we can find species adapted to those changes, right? We're seeing apple trees not survive winters. And what we're discovering is all trees have very sophisticated means to survive winter in higher latitudes where they drop their leaves, right? Not in tropical places. But to survive the winter and sub-freezing temperatures, those cells need to do things to protect themselves, or the tree will die, right? And evolution has provided trees that mechanism. However, the climate is changing so fast now that our trees are losing the ability to survive the winter, because they're waking up in February and then a hard freeze comes again and we're seeing trees die. That's fruit trees, natural trees, that could potentially threaten the entire ecosystems. So advocate for climate change policy. We need to make some change. And I promised you a quiz. Anybody still awake? Yeah? Okay. Who's ready to answer some questions? Should we do this in the chat?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'm just interested to know who might know what watershed you're in. Does anybody know? It could be watersheds are at various scales. I'm in the eastern half of North America, so everything eventually drains to the Atlantic Ocean on my side. But at a smaller scale, I'm in the Hudson River watershed. So I'm going to put that in. If anybody else knows their watershed, please put it in. Good. You've heard of this before. Excellent. Oh, nice. People know the sub-watershed and the major watershed. Very nice. Anvita, very honest. I appreciate it. Good. Oh, I love it. Perfect. That's great. That's one of the learn parts that I wanted you to get into. Now, where does that water come from? Meaning, is it snowmelt? Somebody said the Willamette. That's probably mostly snowmelt. Yep, we've got some snowmelt from the Rockies. That will have implications for what climate change means for your watershed and how much is there. No, I think I already answered that. We already asked that question. Okay. Now, this is phrased more of a Jeopardy type question. Okay. So put it in the chat, frame it as a question. An area or ridge of land that separates water flowing to different rivers, basins, or seas. What is that called? So how many of you know the answer? You don't have to put what is. We'll just assume that you phrased it as a question and followed Jeopardy. Yes, I see watershed. Good. Perfect. You guys are good at this. You were paying attention or you knew the answers? Okay, this one's harder. These occur when groundwater flows onto the land surface. Oh, geez, you guys are quick. This is a good group. Look at that. Awesome. And I think, oh, okay. This is the cheapest and most effective source of water. It's a trick question, kind of. You guys are taking notes. I love it. Perfect. I like the forest nature ecosystem answer because that also applies. I was going for conservation, or as Vivekji said, refusing water. But the forest system also works. Yes, Mother Nature needs half. So that's it. Thank you so much. I think I've only quoted a couple references in there, but my contact information, if anybody ever wants to talk water or food systems or growing apples, agrivoltaics, I'm happy to discuss. And thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jared. And we were thinking if people want to ask Jared any questions.
I saw one in the chat from Rena that says, if New York City is saving, are other cities taking note? At least for the economic savings. Yes, I know that a lot of cities around the world have traveled to the New York City watershed system. It is considered a global model for what I said was payment for ecosystem services, where the ratepayers or the users of the water pay a certain amount to keep the ecosystem and the resource intact. And like I said, there's only a handful of cities in the US who are doing it, but my idea, I think a vision that we should all have is, yeah, we need to get more cities going back to this if they haven't. Decommission those filtration plants that cost $1 billion a year to run, and find a watershed where that can do it.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. Really enjoyed it. Very informative. what is the status of of desalination in terms of like ocean water? I hear like various things about that, but it seems like that hasn't really made a significant amount of progress. So I just didn't know if you kind of had some more information on that.
It's
Thanks.
along the lines of filtration. It's expensive to put together. It's very expensive to maintain, and depending on where you are, 70% of that, you only get 30%. 70% is the wastewater brine that goes back. It's not a very efficient process, and it's very expensive to do at a municipal level. I think, and it can't work in all cases. I know, like, it would be very difficult in Dubai to find a watershed that's going to provide enough rainwater to actually do that. But if there's places where there's forests near to a city, then I think you've got to consider the alternatives, like maintaining those tanks and water systems. Desalinization just takes a lot of money to run.
My question is, it does not seem like, even though water is so critical to our life, most governments around the world make it a priority to provide clean drinking water as a basic right to all of their citizens. And this includes even countries like the US, and you see constant increase in the number of bottled water products that you find in the supermarket aisles. I guess I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are, because you've obviously worked in 3 continents, maybe even more, and why this is not something that governments anywhere seem to make a priority.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because I know that the right to water was a convention at the UN, and ostensibly adopted, but certainly not universally provided. And unfortunately, the turn to packaged water is a challenge for plastics and quality. And I would prefer us to see, in New York City, people can drink water out of the tap. We call it the champagne of drinking water, because of those nice clean streams, and it's treated, it's safe, it's monitored, every second at 300 different locations. It's incredibly safe. But not all cities are going to be able to do that. Gosh, I wish we could not do bottled water, though.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Jared, I'm seeing a couple of questions in chat.
I'm getting to some of them. Somebody asked what's household activity results in the largest wastes of water, and I would say your clothes washer. And some of those old ones are 50 gallons per load. Not many of them are like that anymore, but if you've got an older one, it could be 50 gallons per load. And landscaping, but dishwashers too. Somebody said, which technologies promising? There's a bunch across a range of topics. I think one of the biggest ones that needs to be instituted first, and it's a simple one, is household water meters, because many countries don't have that, and it's certainly needed. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Which crops produce or have a lot of water needs? I'd say sugarcane, but really I was talking more along the lines of plant-based. If your food requires food and water, meaning animals, it's got a much higher water footprint. So plant-based diet is really good, but depending on where you are, it could mean a big difference. Apples on the East Coast, North America, are all rain-fed. Apples grown in Chile are all irrigated desert. So a lot of times we're saying, oh, I want the organic apples, but what we're actually doing is demanding apples be grown in places with low pathology and insect pressure, which are deserts. So we're irrigating deserts to get organic apples. And it's a challenge then for the water side. which organizations are responsible for spreading awareness on water? It really depends on where you are. Certainly your municipal governments have a lot of responsibilities. If you're in a water stressed places, it's usually very regimented. If you're in the Southwest part of North America, water is regulated and you're not even allowed to put your own well in if you want. In places where there's more water, it's a little more permissible. But it just kind of depends on where you are. I would start at your local government and municipal level, and there's usually nonprofits on top of that too that do a lot, or your local extension, university agents.
Hi, Jared. Thank you very much. This was wonderful. I had a question about supporting, similar to the organizations out there. Is it impactful to support more locally versus more, so let's say nationally or globally? It may just be kind of a hard question to answer, but just kind of thinking about, let's say, as a community, if we wanted to support some organizations, where would the impact be the greatest?
It's a good question. I've run a lot of community-based watershed organizations, and I can tell you they don't get a lot of support and a lot of attention. So I would say local, because there's a lot of dedicated people out there who are spending a bunch of time on improving whatever your watershed or watershed management, water conservation, and they're not getting paid to do it, or they don't have the resources to do it. So I would say local, because I've been in their shoes a bunch. Okay. Zoe, did you have a question?
I was going on the personal habit side more, and I needed support. I keep thinking all the time, the Northeast has a lot of water. Why do I really have to worry about it personally? Because me saving a cup of water here is not helping other places. Is it illogical for me to think that way, or?
No, I think all of us are. I think we need to do it to survive too, because if you're like me, Zoe, you're aware of a lot of the environmental hazards and perils we face. So, even if it's just for us to remain sane, I think you should. That's why, yeah. But it does help to conserve and use less, no matter where you are. It certainly does, because there's just a lot of infrastructure that goes into bringing that water to us, regardless of, and places that have never faced scarcity before are. The town next to ours has a small reservoir that's never gone dry before, and they were in a water emergency this last summer, and they were scrambling because they haven't even contemplated the challenges that they faced. And then all of a sudden it's like, you can't water your lawn, you can't wash your car, and I don't know what they were going to do beyond that. I know in Bangalore, people are getting notices now that a lot of the large complexes, they're having shortages. So, tankers are getting remanded to other places and things are getting moved around. I think we're all going to face those challenges. So it's a good habit to get in. Selma, I see your hand up too.
Sorry, Jay, this is probably unfair. I could just walk over and ask you after the thing, but I think what are your personal strategies for avoiding like sort of, I don't say climate change fatigue, but like the crisis fatigue, right? If it's like, it's the plastic, no, it's the toxins, no, it's the organic, no, it's the electricity, no, it's the water, it's the thing, I get a tree plant, I got to do, you're obviously doing work in the trenches for it and sort of beyond local habits and personal habits and stuff. What strategies do you have for a community like ours that gets into the stuff and to sort of stay positive and optimistic?
Yeah.
I hope that's a fair question for a spouse.
No, it's a very fair question. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't. I think it's, I don't know. I don't know. It's a challenge for me. I think seeing what's coming is just, I don't know. I think we do what we can, but I also have to take my head out of it once in a while and just enjoy life and just be. You know, that's why we go hiking and spend time with my kids. That's why I'm trying to teach them science so they can figure out solutions to work their way out of this ridiculous crisis that we're putting them in. Is there more in the chat?
Just be and ridiculous crisis in the same set of words. Okay. Breathing in and breathing out. But Sudarshan, go ahead. No, please.
Hi, Jared. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering, to be able to like empathize more with people who are going through these struggles, what would you recommend is the best like local place to go or to understand more? Because I know you had an really impactful experience when you were young of seeing a place where that moved you to like change your whole career. So I like and in the East Coast or is there something that would be like worth seeing?
Oh, it's a good question. I know there's a lot of really inspirational work happening out there. A lot of really dedicated people in a lot of places. Yeah, I would see what's local because like I said, there's just so many. I think, to get back to Salmia's question, I think a lot of people are channeling this. They're feeling this existential dread of the environment, and they've put it into careers. So, you said on the East Coast?
Yeah, I'm in the DC area, but anywhere, yeah.
Gosh, you've got a lot of good stuff in the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation is just phenomenal. I mean, that's probably like a big, now well-funded thing, but what they've done there is incredible because we've all heard of it. They were one of the first and one of the biggest, so I would look to see what they're doing, or the scrappy young nonprofits that are starting up, that are filling in those gaps that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation isn't too big to look at. But I can ask some folks. I know some folks who work in watershed stuff in DC, in that area. If you want, I can follow up. Somebody's asking about the Jum Nugget project in Gujarat. I haven't heard of it.
Just thank you, Jared. I'm going to learn a lot more about watersheds now, at least in my local area. I really appreciated the importance of it. So
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Hari Om, everyone.